The Book Programme, presented by Hannah Murray.
Joining us on the line now from the UK is Nick Cook. He worked in the computer games industry for more than 21 years as a graphic artist and creative director, helping to produce over 40 titles, including many chart-topping hits. He's with us on the book show, though, to talk about his debut novel, the first in a trilogy for young adults. It's called Cloud Riders, and he's been touring schools to discuss the book with his most prized possession in tow, a tornado generator. Welcome to the book show, Nick.
Hi, Hannah. Good to be on.
I first of all have to ask you about a tornado generator. That sounds both cool and exciting at the same time.
It really is. It's a fabulous device for really capturing the kids' imagination, as you can probably imagine. When I sort of start this up in the classroom, a tornado spout actually appears, and that's just magic for a child, or for an adult actually as well. And it's been such a great way to really bring the idea of a twister to life in their heads, so they can literally see it in the classroom.
Because I think the idea of it, from various films, even from, sort of nice stories, if you like, obviously The Wizard of Oz, to more thriller stories like Twister, we're led to believe that these are really scary things.
Well, of course, that is the flip side of the twister. I mean, they're obviously a very incredible natural phenomena that happens, particularly in the middle of the United States. But the actual destructive side is also a very real threat. And part of my research to the book Cloud Riders, I've actually got to know quite a lot of storm chasers, people who actually pursue twisters, not just necessarily for the threat of it, but actually because they're doing serious scientific research.
Yeah.
And it's quite harrowing, actually, sort of some of the stories that I've heard back from the storm chasers, because they really are the first people out there, first responders, dealing with the aftermath of twisters. And not only that, because they often have storm sirens in the US, and these sirens can be going off, and people, I've been told this, people are ignoring them. They wander in, so the storm chasers come hurtling in their trucks, and people are still going to restaurants and things, just ignoring the twister. And there's literally a great big twister coming down the road.
Blimey. Why do people ignore them?
Well, I think because they get a lot of false alarms, and people just, they don't actually believe something till they see it. And so the storm chasers are there on the front line saying, no, this is real, get to a shelter now. And they save lives. They really do, these people. And, sadly, some do lose their life in that process. I think the depiction from films and even some of the documentaries that there's been about storm chasers maybe missed some of the sort of the human side of the story, which is, I've got so much respect for these people, having spoken to quite a few of them now, and they do a very important job out there.
And how did you get into the idea of looking at tornadoes as a basis for the children's stories or young adult stories?
Well, this is a classic one, and I'm not the only author where this has happened, but it was literally a dream. I had a dream of this twister hitting, and just to give it a little insight into the book itself, the story is set in Tornado Alley, and it centres around the family of storm chasers. And basically, the lead character, Don, his dad was killed in a twister a year before that he flew into, trying to get some photographs of. And then ever since, all the tornadoes have stopped, have died away, and there's been a huge drought and dust storms which have ravaged the US. And then 1 year later, a twister hits, and out of it flies an airship. So there you go. I mean, that's what I actually dreamed.
Really? You dreamt that? Wow.
I dreamt an airship appearing out of a tornado. And I woke up, I was like, that's just an amazing idea. And then obviously that became the impetus and the inspiration for the book, what became the book. And but it was a full Technicolor, very vivid dream.
And why did you decide to make it a trilogy?
Because there is so much potential. I mean, there's much more going on with the book than just a tornado and just airships. There's all sorts of hints about, I think I can probably say this, parallel worlds, basically.
Okay.
So there's a very epic storyline. And in fact, ultimately, there will be a number of trilogies which are actually linked together, because there's an even bigger story arc in the background. So, yes, I do like my big stories, basically.
And how did you get into wanting to write in the first place? Because 21 years is a long time to be working in, well, any industry, but you were heavily involved with computer games.
Absolutely, and it's an interesting question, that, because I found myself, I've been asked that a number of times recently, and what you end up doing, you sort of step outside your own life and you look back at it and you think, well, where were the key influences? And I think, actually, without a doubt, it was watching Neil Armstrong walking on the moon. And, you know, that was such a seminal moment back in the end of the 60s, that especially if you were a child. And, you know, to see that incredible event happen, to hear those immortal words, really just fired up an absolute passion for, you know, obviously space travel. Every child wants to be an astronaut, of course, so did I, and science fiction. So the science fiction sort of reflected all that was going on with the space race during the 60s. And that really ignited that spark, which never left me, which then became a spark for writing, which I then pursued. But of course, the way that these things go, your life takes you in other directions. I actually did a sculpture degree, and at the end of that,
something entirely different again.
And at the end of that, I thought, oh right, I've actually got to make a living out of this now. And somebody just knew I was interested in computers, which I was at the time, and they offered me a job straight out of art college, which of course I thought, well, you know, starve to death in a garret or work in the games industry. I think I'll take the latter, you know. You know. It's been, that became obviously the focus of my life for many years, but the desire to write had never left me. And through all those years I was writing short stories and poems, and then 21 years later I had one of those wonderful opportunities in life to actually pursue my dreams, sort of thing. And it meant leaving the games industry, but I have honestly never looked back, because for me, being a writer, and I've been writing now full-time for 7 years, has really been one of the best decisions of my life, because it's an incredibly fulfilling thing to do. And, you know, to actually, obviously I've always lived off my imagination with the games industry as well, so that's always been there, but there's something much more immediate about writing, and particularly I think writing for young adults, and also with Cloud Risers it's turned out to be a crossover book, so that means it's appealing to as many adults as well. And I think what's great there is that the sort of landscapes I paint with my words actually then reform in the reader's minds, and that's just magical when you go into schools and you get that sort of reaction from the kids, and they're listening to you know, talk about your work, but particularly reading some of the work, and they're sort of lighting up with it. They're enthusing, and you know, I think that's what every writer hopes to do, to create that spark.
But was it a conscious decision to write for young adults?
Yeah, it takes a while to find your voice as an author, and that's certainly the part where the 7 years have gone. But also to find the right audience for your work. And actually, there's been all sorts of debate about, you know, the merits of young adult writing, but I absolutely believe with a passion that writing for young adults is one of the most challenging readerships that you can possibly aim for, because, you know, teens do not suffer fools gladly. Your writing's got to be very sharp, very well paced. It can't waffle. You really have to progress the story very actively, and you've got to have very strong characters who really engage. So I think there's a very good reason that a lot of adults read young adult novels today, because they are very, very well put together, very, very well thought through. Yes, I went to the hardest market, I think. But I think it's also, I have a teenage son myself who sort of grew up through the books, who's in, my son Josh is 19 now at university, but he literally grew up through the books, through all the different books I've got, and I tried, and I wrote, and different drafts, and there's a dedication to him at the front of the book, because he really was the person who was my absolute fiercest critic. And that's what you need from your son, particularly, to actually be very honest with you, because he is the target audience, you know.
Absolutely. No, that must have been really handy. I mean, traditionally, you know, family and friends are quite worried in upsetting you, and will automatically think you're good because they love you and they want you to do well. So it was great that he felt he could be honest with you.
Oh, yeah. I don't know if it's maybe a thing with teenage boys particularly, maybe, because they will tell you exactly what they think.
Honest whether you like it or not.
But that's so important as a writer, that you actually get that sort of feedback.
Yeah.
And also I worked with manuscript agencies, and I have a wonderful agent as well. And all these people have been key in helping to sort of push myself to push the writing. And through that process, you find who you are as a writer, and you perhaps most importantly find your voice.
Yeah.
And that, I think, for me at least, is very true with Cloud Riders.
Well, it's been great to have you with us on the book show. Nick Cook, thank you very much for joining us. If listeners want to find out more about you and your books, they can via your website, which is nick-cook.net. They can also follow you on Twitter at Cloud Riders, and that Cloud Riders is the title of book number 1. Nick, thanks ever so much for joining us, and best of luck with the book.